Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. I hope everybody is having a great morning out there. If you're in Denver, especially on the southwest side, I hope you were able to dig yourself out of the snowstorm. We didn't get anything up here in northern Colorado, but my dad down in Lakewood got about a foot. So I know some of you guys got hit pretty hard. My condolences. I am extremely over winter. That said, I'm extremely into all of the sports action going on of late. Last night was electric. The Four Nations gold medal round, championship, whatever you want to call it. It was an absolute blast. The intensity of this tournament throughout was amazing. I loved following it. Congrats to our brothers and sisters to the North. Hard-fought victory in OT. Just as painful as the 2010 Olympics for us U.S. hockey fans. But it was a blast to watch. We've got a lot of great college basketball action coming up this weekend. I'm going to set the scene for both the men's and women's teams, both playing against UNLV, both hoping to keep pace and essentially keep their shot at finishing top two alive in the league. The women still have an outside shot to potentially win the regular season title. They'd need a little bit of help, but we'll get into all that. We'll give an updated Mountain West power ranking. We'll talk about the men's matchup, obviously. A ton to get into, but yesterday afternoon, they released the 2025 conference schedule for the Mountain West. Obviously, the final season in this iteration of the Mountain West as we know it. A little bit bittersweet for those of us that have followed it. I mean, I've been a Mountain West guy my entire life. It's all I've really ever known. I mean, technically speaking, was alive, when they moved from the WAC to the Mountain West, but 4-year-old Justin didn't have a ton of opinions on that at the time. It is going to be weird to have a lot of these games this fall be the last known matchup against teams that CSU has been playing for decades. Goes back, further than the WAC in some instances with some of these schools. So it's definitely going to be a weird experience. I imagine there's going to be a little bit of lingering hostility amongst the various schools. If you're on the Mountain West side of things, if you're on the Pac-12 side of things, I do think it's going to make for pretty great drama in terms of the content and everything that's going to come out of it. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that I have some conflicting feelings about it all, because I most certainly feel that CSU, based on everything that had happened around them in college football in the couple of years before, kind of starting with Texas and OU going to the SEC, followed by the falling apart essentially of the Pac-12, USC and UCLA decide to go to the Big Ten, creates a bunch of chaos. I do think there would have been a world in which those 10 remaining schools could have just added like SMU and San Diego State and probably still would have been most of the Pac-12 that we always knew. That didn't happen. A lot of those schools went to the Big 12, a couple went to the ACC. And because of it, it's just created all of this chaos the last couple of years. And, the reality is that schools like Boise State and San Diego State have been trying to get out of Mountain West for a long time. It goes back to when those schools agreed to join the Big East back when we still felt like geography was a very relevant factor with all of this. So that was considered extremely crazy at the time. San Diego State obviously tried to leave for the Pac-12 a couple years ago as well. The writing has been on the wall in that regard for a while. The top teams in the Mountain West, in terms of, value with some of the bigger leagues, have been unhappy for a while. And like we talked about with Jeff Grammer, a lot of it just kind of comes down to funding. And schools like CSU, San Diego State, Boise State, they are trying to keep up in this crazy landscape of college athletics. They are committed to athletics financially in a way that some of these other schools aren't. And I know I've talked about a lot of this already, so I'm not trying to be too repetitive. But when I posted the schedule, we got a couple of snarky responses from various fans. I got one from a CU fan this morning, basically saying, congrats to CSU for killing the Air Force in quote unquote rivalry for an extra million in TV dollars. First of all, CU has no leg to stand on when it comes to playing local rivals. Why aren't we going to have a Rocky Mountain Showdown for the next 4 years if it's so important? Second of all, it's going to be a lot more than $1 million. And third, CSU and Air Force, while it's a relationship that has been consistent in the Mountain West era, I just kind of always argued that it's felt like a forced rivalry. They emphasize the service academies. We emphasize CU and Wyoming. I don't really believe it's a game that the majority of us are going to miss all that much, once we get going. Will it be a little bit weird at first? Yes, but I do feel like it's a little bit poetic that CSU will play Air Force in the regular season finale. Last game that's guaranteed between these two schools for the foreseeable future. I've seen people make comments like it's time for CSU to start an annual series with Air Force the way they're doing with Wyoming. I disagree. I think you need a little bit more variety in your schedule. Admittedly, it's a matchup that's a pain in the ass for CSU. You typically have to play this wonky offense, and the Rams obviously have not had a ton of success against them, so there's probably an element of me being sour grapes, but I just don't really feel like it's a game where anybody is going to miss it all that much. Maybe you play yearly in hoops because you've got more flexibility with the non-conference schedule. But in terms of Mountain West members outside of Wyoming that I would like to keep playing, New Mexico is higher on that list for me in terms of non-conference games that make sense. Albuquerque's just a nice drive down I-25 for Ram fans. Not too bad of a process. I enjoy going there, especially in like September. The weather'd be nice. Could have to deal with the balloon fiesta or whatever, which can be kind of a pain in the butt. But I do think it's going to be weird leaving the Mountain West. I think it's fitting that in the final year of the Mountain West as we know it, CSU is actually playing all of the remaining founding members of the conference. BYU and Utah are obviously long gone, but they're playing UNLV, San Diego State, New Mexico, Wyoming, which makes a lot of sense in this last year. We already knew the non-conference schedule. Obviously, they open up at Washington, who I fully expect to be much improved from a year ago. I don't think that's going to be the same mediocre Husky teams we saw this fall. Washington State, obviously, at the end of the non-conference schedule, a bit of a question mark given the amount of players that they lost. Everything's new, new coaches, new players. Obviously, that's impacted CSU with Dickert going to Wake Forest and taking some CSU guys. So CSU and Washington State probably equally rooting against Wake Forest this fall. But, I don't really know what to expect with either of those, but I do think Washington will be better. I feel like Washington State will be worse than what they were this past year. Northern Colorado, that's a game you always have got to win. Week 3 bye is a little bit earlier than you would have hoped for sure. But we also knew that with the way that the non-conference games were laid out, with playing Washington on the 30th, UNC on the 6th, and then UTSA on the 20th and Washington State on the 27th, because you got rid of that Vanderbilt game, you were either going to have a bye there or you were going to play a conference game. And the reason that happens is because of Air Force and their service academy games. They always have to play at least one September Mountain West matchup, which means at least one other team does. Usually it ends up being a couple. And based on the way those schedules worked out with the Mountain West teams that we knew CSU was going to play, we just didn't know the dates. They only could have played Air Force or gone to Boise State or San Diego State in week 3. You could maybe talk me into playing Air Force that early in the year would be a benefit, just because you could really focus on that option offense in camp and it would still be fresh. They do work on it in camp every year. A lot of the times it's, October, November by the time you're actually dealing with it. They're also a team that, because they're so well coached, like come week 12, I imagine, or, game 12, week 14, I imagine they're going to be pretty solid. But I don't want to play Air Force week 3. I certainly don't want to go to Boise. San Diego State, I guess you could have talked me into, but I just believe that having your non-conference slate be separate from your conference slate is the more desirable scheduling format. Gives you an opportunity to work through some kinks early on in the year, and then you get into the games that really matter. Last year with the 5 non-conference games, I really liked that. I felt like CSU, by the time they're playing game 6, like that wasn't the same Rams team that we saw in early September. And with how much league games count, in terms of the push for a conference title and just, how much they impact your season, I don't love having to play them that early. If I remember back in the day, I think CSU actually opened the year against New Mexico once, like week 1 in a conference game. Super weird. But especially because you have that bye week 10 as well. It's not a situation where you're going to play, 2 games, have that week 3 bye. And then if you had to play like 10 straight weeks after that with no break, that would be rough. That happened, what was that, 2023 when CSU played week 1 against Washington State at a week 2 bye, then played at Boulder and had to play 9 straight, or how many games was that in a row? Was it like 10 straight weeks? 10 the season. Math is hard on the fly. But with the week 10 bye, I'm not that worried about it. Getting into the conference slate here, which is really what we wanted to know. We wanted to know, would they have a week 3 bye or would they be playing a league game? They got that bye. You play UTSA, which has been a solid program, but that's certainly a game you've got to expect to win at home. Washington State feels like a bit of a coin flip to me at this point. In the Toyota chat, John says that UNM opener was the debut of Pete Thomas. Don't ask me why I remember that or why I remember thinking he would be the answer at QB. John, everybody was into the Pete Thomas hype, and that was one of the first examples of me being like a diehard college football fan and being locked into the recruiting process and having that realization of the recruiting stars don't always mean everything. Sometimes guys are hyped up and they just don't live up to what they are projected to be. If I remember correctly, that might have also been when CSU debuted the new version of the Russell jerseys that had the little like paint splat thing on the shoulders that in hindsight they have not aged well at all. But I thought they were so sick back in the day. I thought those were so cool. I actually have one in the closet somewhere from my high school sweetheart back in the day. Gave me that for Christmas. Really going down memory lane here. Opening on the road at San Diego State, all things considered, I think is a fine way to start up league play. You've got 7 home games this year, which is a big advantage, just like last year. You knew that you were going to play 3 of 4 at home in September. So you have an opportunity to, get your feet underneath you, play in front of your home fans. Should be probably pretty hot for a couple of those, but also should be great weather for Ram Nation to begin the year. But I like going out on the road, especially, because you're not going to Boise, you're not going to Laramie or something like that. Either open in Albuquerque, which is what we hoped for yesterday when we were talking about this on the show, or San Diego State. My reasoning of opening in Albuquerque and then bookending with San Diego State was that, it gives you a nice road trip to drive in early October for the fans and then a chance to go to San Diego in December. So I still think that would have been more preferable from the fan standpoint. But in terms of easing into the league slate and getting an opportunity to get a road win in conference play, which is big, I like that they're starting against what I assume will be a pretty winnable game. San Diego State kind of a question mark at this point, just given that they lost O'Brien, their quarterback transferred to Wisconsin, or Danny O'Neill. Lewis Brown obviously came back to Fort Collins. Offensively, I don't really know what they're going to look like. I think Sean Lewis is a great coach. I think he's going to get that program rolling. I also feel kind of bad for those fans because it was supposed to be an instance of we're going to suffer our lumps in year 1. We're going to get our freshman quarterback all these live reps, and then we're going to reap the benefit of that in 2025, 2026, and beyond. In the portal era, it's sometimes hard to build for the future, as they found out the hard way. And then, with him moving on, we'll see. Again, I think Lewis is a good coach, but in terms of road trips you can make to start league play, San Diego State, pretty solid. Great trip for the fans, but I just mean it's not going to be super hostile. The weather should be solid. I mean, I guess it could rain or something. But nice way to kind of start in league play there. You don't want to get too comfortable at home after playing 3 or 4 in September. It could have been a spot where if you then had your first game or two of league play at home too, you might end up playing 2-3 road games in a row. There is a stretch late in the season where you play back-to-back road games. That's not super ideal. But we'll keep talking about all this. We need to take a quick breather real quick. Shout out a couple of our partners, pay the bills, and make all of this possible. First of all, we're going to shout out Toyota, proud partner of CSU Athletics, the official vehicle of DNVR. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma or the iconic Land Cruiser. They've got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They've also got more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from. The Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck is sick, not to be outdone. You can take command with the SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right, who else we got here? I also want to shout out Shady Rays. When you're cruising around in your Toyota, you want to be looking sharp. Shady Rays is a great way to do just that. Independent sunglass company offering a world-class product rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Durable frames, crystal clear optics, making them the perfect choice for any outdoor adventure you have. If you're in the pool, if you're skiing, you're walking the dog, you name it, Shady Rays is awesome. I've got multiple pairs and I use them all of the time. What's especially great about Shady Rays, if you happen to lose or break your Shady Rays, every single pair is backed by lost and broken replacements. They'll replace them, no questions asked. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out the best deal of the season. Go to shadyrays.com, use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, let's get back into the schedule here, give a couple more thoughts, give you some fun facts about some of these Mountain West matchups, all that. And then, like I said, we will transition into hoops later on in the show, set the scene for a big game against UNLV at home for the women's team and out on the road for the men's team, both trying to keep pace in the top 3. Where we left off before the break there, we were just getting into the league slate and talking about why opening against San Diego State was not the worst way to breeze into things. In general, I feel like the first couple of weeks of the league slate, at least on paper, some of these teams could be way better or way worse than we anticipate. But on paper, the first couple of games, pretty favorable for the Rams. You open with a winnable road game, then you've got a couple of winnable games at home. Fresno State in week 7 on October 11th, Hawaii on week 8 on October 18th. Would assume that one of those ends up being homecoming. If you have like UTSA or UNC end up being the orange out, it would make a lot of sense. Neither of those teams inherently are going to, really move the needle. Those could be games where you could use the boost in attendance and the timing of it, mid-October, kind of perfect right before it gets too cold. I could understand the arguments for UNLV November 8th, but you could have a really cold weekend by then. And I think they generally try and have it be better weather just because you have all of the festivities and, the barbecue and everything that goes along the bonfire with the homecoming process. As far as Fresno State goes, it's actually going to be the first time that they have come to Fort Collins since 2016. CSU won that game. It was a really hot afternoon in Hughes Stadium, one of the hotter games I can remember as a student, and the Rams won 37-0, absolutely thumped them. One of the more one-sided college football games that I can remember. Since then, CSU's played them 3 times, but because of COVID and the way that the schedules have been changed and stuff like that, they've actually all been in Fresno the last 3 times that CSU has played them. So first time that the Bulldogs will come to Canvas Stadium. They're actually the last team in the Mountain West to play a game in Canvas Stadium. Kind of a fun fact for you. My guy Gabe Camarillo, who covers Fresno State, does a great job I will get him on the show at some point this fall. He pointed that out on Twitter, went back and verified it. He is correct. Fun little wrinkle in the schedule. They've never actually been here. Hawaii has come to Canvas Stadium a couple of times. They're actually 3-1 against CSU over their last 4, and this is round 3 between Timmy Chang and Jay Norvell. You know, Chang was supposed to be the wide receiver coach on Norvell's initial staff here at CSU. All the weird stuff happens with Todd Graham at Hawaii. Chang ends up getting the job super late in the process, takes Sheffield with him as well, who's another guy that was supposed to be on that CSU staff. Jay got the best of him in round 1. Hawaii certainly got the best of us in round 2, preventing us from going to a bowl game. Round 3 in year 4 of both of these respective coaching tenures, I think, is going to deceptively be a pretty important game. You know, Hawaii kind of underperformed from where I hoped for them to be. They were competitive last year, but I just felt like with Braden Shager coming back, they were going to be more potent offensively than they were, but they did, and I'm trying to blank on his name at the moment, they did find their young freshman quarterback who played a lot at the end, and he looks like he's going to be a good fit in that run-and-shoot system that Timmy Chang likes to run. Has some air raid influences as well, but this is a big game. You know, it's crazy to say that Norvell and Chang are tied for the second longest tenured coaches in the entire league at this point. It's only year 4, but the turnover has just been so drastic the last couple of years. They're number 2 behind Calhoun at Air Force, and it kind of feels like a prove-it year for both of these teams. I do feel like Chang is going to get a little bit longer of a leash, just given, you know, with the resources that they have or don't have, I guess I should say, at Hawaii. You know, like, I don't think they can afford to just be firing coaches left and right. He's their guy, one of the greatest quarterbacks they've ever had. You know, a local guy wants to win and wants to win there. He's not just going to jump ship for anywhere. I think they're going to give him some time to do it. But, you know, back-to-back 5-7 finishes, I believe, or maybe they were 4-8 the year before. It hasn't quite gotten going like I thought that it would. I think he's a good coach. I've enjoyed talking to him at a media days the last couple of years. But I feel like right in the middle of your season there, and, you know, like, we'll just say realistically and not go super optimistic, but we'll say you finish 500 realistically in the non-conference slate. Really would love to go 3-1, win all those home games, but we don't really know what to expect of Washington State yet. I think all of those first 3 league games are winnable. At that point, you know, you could be sitting there at 4-2 with a chance to go 5-2 before the border war. I mean, there's an opportunity here, and I think they're going to have to start hot if they want to make any type of noise whatsoever. But there's a chance here to get the ball rolling over these first couple of games, you know, win out on the road, then a couple of very winnable games in Fresno State and Hawaii at home, which sets up a week 9 border war. October 25th, the first time we'll have an October border war since 2016. That's a game most of us would like to forget out at Hughes Stadium. If you remember, the Rams came out in their normal uniforms, then they go back and change into those all gray uniforms, end up just getting their teeth kicked in by Josh Allen and Wyoming. That was kind of the first night I was like, oh God, this dude is for real. He made some absurd plays, and then obviously went on to be a pretty good NFL quarterback as well. But that was just a brutal night. I remember talking about that with some of the offensive linemen, you know, my good friend Jake Bennett, one of the starters on that O-line. And it's not easy for the big guys to put on their game day pads and, you know, get those jerseys are so tight. Like, it's, especially in a rush, it's kind of an exhausting process. And just everything about that entire process was just a disaster. I prefer to think back to the last October border war we had in Laramie, which was 2013. And if you remember, at the time, CSU under Jim McElwain, they started 2-4. Now, that year ended really fun, but they started 2-4. Wyoming, I believe, was 4-2 at the time. They almost beat, it was like Nebraska or Tennessee or something like that out on the road. And then CSU with McElwain, they just go up into Laramie and they lay the hammer down. They win that game 52-22. It was a 30-point thumping up in Laramie. Really got the Rams rolling in the second half of that season. But obviously with an October border war, the first thing that comes to mind is hopefully, and you never know, late October, you could certainly still have snow. It could be windy and nasty. It could be very cold. But with the last 5 having all been in November in Laramie, it should at least, knock on wood, be a little bit less of an intense commute for Ram fans, because 287's nasty, man. I've driven back in a couple of whiteout conditions that had me, white knuckling the steering wheel the entire time and questioning if any of it was worth it. Like, what am I doing out here? So I never want that. I'll especially never forget that 2017 game where CSU up in Laramie. It was fine. Like, it was cold, but it was fine. And then at halftime just turns into a legit whiteout, one of the coldest games CSU's ever played. And I'm driving a bunch of student media folks back in my little piece of crap Mazda and just praying to God that we get back to Fort Collins. And as soon as we did, it was like the weather completely cleared up. Same thing happened in the 2013 flood. I went to a show at the First Bank Center, which I don't even think exists anymore, and got caught driving back in that flood, water up to the tires in the Mazda, and just hoping we can get back to Fort Collins. Fort Collins has always been the haven. Just if I can get back to FOCO, life's going to be all right. That's been my mentality for over 10 years now. Got really sidetracked there. I'm sorry. I will say I wish that CSU would have had a bye ahead of the border war like both teams did last year. I mean, that's always preferable. I would have liked to have had the bye before Wyoming or the trip to Boise State if I got to pick. Obviously, they don't design the schedule based on what's most convenient for CSU. I'll also say I don't feel like the league got petty, because if you remember back, and this was pointed out to me by my guy Smitty on Twitter, that when TCU was leaving, the league got real petty with them, with the way that they scheduled them. The schedule I feel like that might be the hardest is Wyoming. I mean, their non-conference schedule is already intense because they've got Utah and CU, but they've got like UNLV and Air Force and CSU in the first couple games. They finish on the island. That's a brutal schedule. I thought they might give teams like CSU, Boise State that type of treatment. Doesn't really seem to be the case. Wyoming being the 6th game in a 6-week stretch with no breaks. Again, not the most optimal. That's early enough in the year. You'd hope that they'd be able to withstand it. But again, like if you could design a perfect schedule, I think you would have had the bye 1 week earlier and then you play Wyoming. But I also don't hate having a bye for the Final Four. You get it before a big home game against UNLV. We shall see how good UNLV ultimately is this season under Dan Mullen. They're recruiting well. I think they'll probably have success under him, but by week 11, we'll certainly know if that's the case or not. That could be a really fun game potentially. CSU, like we said, they start the Mountain West slate with a pretty rough or pretty easy schedule. They finish with a pretty rough, kind of similar to 2017, as I saw a couple of people tweet out. I will say that 2017 schedule was worse. There was just a 3 or 4 year stretch there where it felt like they got Wyoming, Air Force, Boise in consecutive weeks, like every single year. They've still got them like 3 and 5 weeks this year. But it could be worse, and we shall see how good UNLV is, but that could potentially be a game that has big time conference championship implications. You like that the students will at least be on campus before you go out on the road for games against New Mexico and Boise State. If I could have hand designed the schedule, I would have had week 14 be a road game. I just think it's hard to fill your stadium as a G5 team when the students are on break for Thanksgiving. Every year the schedule comes out, I have people ask me, why don't CSU and Wyoming play in rivalry week, the last week of the season, week 14? It's because of that. It's hard to fill the stadium at that point. You've got weather to worry about too, like week 14 in Laramie, Wyoming, last weekend in November, that could be gnarly, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where a game that is basically a guaranteed sellout, at least close to it, ends up only having like 15,000 fans because the weather's nasty and the students are on break and all of that fun stuff. We'll give a couple more thoughts here on the schedule in just a second. We are also going to talk a ton of hoops here in the second half of the show. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on YouTube, if you're rocking with us, got any questions, comments, concerns, get them in there. We'll talk about as many as we can throughout the show. And at the end, if I don't get to them live, but I appreciate everybody that's rocking with us this morning. Real quick, I do want to shout out a couple of our partners. One of our longest partners, actually, Breckenridge Brewery. You have an opportunity to win the Breck Brew Ice Deck giveaway, which is 2 VIP tickets for the Avalanche and Blues on March 29th. You'll get tickets on the glass, complimentary food and drink. We are talking high life. I mean, I've actually seen where these seats are. They're down by where I can go in the media area when the game is ending up. And your view it's pretty incredible. I mean, they're getting slammed up on the glass right there. It's electric. So big shout out to Breck Brew. If you want a chance to win that, go to breckbrew.com/ice deck. You can also find the link in my show notes. I also want to talk to you guys about the Breck Brew West Coast style IPA Ridge Runner. This double dry hop brew is inspired by the untamed beauty of Colorado's trails, creates bright notes of citrus and pine. Breckenridge Brewery is the official craft beer of DNVR. They've been doing it for 35 years now, actually. Says 33, but longer than that. They've got a beer for any occasion. They've got Funslinger, which is fun to say, fun to drink. They've got their own seltzer line, the Good Company seltzer line, if you're more into that. Check out the Breck Beer locator at breckbrew.com to find a brew near you. I also want to shout out the homies at Saturday Neon, who genuinely left me speechless when they hooked me up with this neon LED CSU sign I've got in the background. It's a little intense for the live streams here. If I had a better quality camera, I think it would look better. I'm working on it because I want you guys to be able to see it shining bright. Here, I'll turn it on. It's a local company started by CU alums. Got to be transparent, but they've got a lot of awesome LED neon signs for over 50 of the biggest schools, including CSU. They are really great. I mean, they've hooked up the DNVR bar, the DNVR studios. They hooked me up personally, obviously. I really appreciate it. The LED lasts up to 100,000 hours, so you know you'll be enjoying the sign for years to come. It took less than 2 minutes to install. I mean, it's easy as that. Just plug it in. Boom. If you use the code DNVR, you're going to save 10% off. These are awesome. Just go to SaturdayNeon.com, check them all out. And again, big shout out to those guys because they hooked me up with this sign unexpectedly and really, made my year. So big shout out to them. Big shout out to all of Ram Nation. Shout out to my guy, Rory Roth, by the way, diehard CSU fan. Hooked me up with a Torrey Horton and BFN card, which, again, really made my day. So shout out to all you guys. Getting a little sappy here. Let's give a couple of thoughts on the end of the schedule, and then let's move on over to hoops. I've already taken longer on this than I intended to, but I got a lot of info to give you. New Mexico, CSU looking to extend that winning streak to 14 games, which is just absolutely insane. Who knows? I mean, that could be it. You could just end the CSU New Mexico series on a 14-game winning streak. November 21st, 2009 was the last time that they beat CSU. I was a freshman in high school at the time. I was 14 years old. I will be 30 when they play this fall for potentially, the last time anytime soon, to give you an idea of how long this winning streak over the Lobos has carried, which is just to do that against any league opponent. I don't care who it is. It's just significant. I mean, imagine, you don't even have to imagine. Think about the CSU Boise series and how one-sided that was from 2011 through 2022, a decade plus. I mean, we're approaching 16 years on the CSU New Mexico dominance. Pretty crazy. They're going to want that one bad. It's later in the year with I think Eck is a good hire for them, and I think he will get that thing competitive at least. So maybe you would have liked to have played him earlier in the year, but at this point, that's just a game that you expect to win if you're CSU. I don't hate Boise being the final road game. I really don't, for a couple of reasons. I think there's a lot of unknown with them at this point. You bring Maddox Madsen back, and they're supposed to have another stud running back. I'm sure they'll be solid. Gianti is the sole reason, maybe not the sole, but basically the sole reason that they made the playoff this year and won the league. It's going to be hard to sustain that. And if they can keep it rolling this year, I'll tip my hat to Spencer Danielson, but it's easy to win when you've got Gianti. It's going to be really interesting to see how they respond now, after losing their workhorse. And by that stage of the season, that game could potentially have huge conference championship implications if CSU does what they should with the talent they're going to have. It could also be a situation where like Boise struggles and their season's basically over, and you get your first road win over Boise State because they basically thrown in the towel and are looking forward to Christmas break. I don't expect that. I mean, obviously their standard is pretty high at this point, but you never know. And I think to just assume that they're going to be the same team that they were this year is a lot, because losing Gianti and Hassani on the defensive side, those are pretty significant contributors on both sides of the ball. Finally, you finish against Air Force. We've talked about it already, but it will be the last game that CSU has on the schedule against all of the founding Mountain West members who they play this year outside of BYU and Utah. Feels a little bit poetic. You don't have Utah State on the schedule this year, who I have kind of floated as the logical choice to be CSU's regional conference rival in the Pac-12. I think you should implement a traveling trophy that replaces the Ram Falcon trophy, which is a whack trophy anyways. It's ugly. And it just makes a lot of sense. You've already played 80 times. It's been extremely competitive, going back to 2011 when they started playing. They played the last couple years in the WAC before Utah State joined the Mountain West as well. But yeah, that budding rivalry kind of on pause this year. But I'm okay with that because in the final season of the Mountain West, it feels fitting that they're going to play New Mexico and UNLV and San Diego State and all these teams that we watch CSU play for years and years. Kind of a fitting way to go out and cap off our time in a conference that we founded. We were the people that got this going. Albert Yates back in the day, along with those other institutions, but he was really the one that got that whole thing rolling. Bittersweet, but I'm excited for the future ahead. I'm excited to see how CSU can perform this year. Way too early expectations, minimum 7 wins, but I would say that in any schedule that you have 7 home games. Like, you might drop a home game, then you got to make up for it out on the road, but you should expect to win your home games. If you win all your home games, you go at least 500 every year. UTSA, Wyoming, and Air Force, and there's a couple more in there, but those feel like the 3 I would pinpoint that really flip your season one way or the other. Wyoming or Air Force, who knows where they'll be at competitively. Both finished the season fairly strong after having rough years. I have a lot of respect, obviously, for Calhoun, so I just assume that Air Force will be solid. UTSA has been a good program of late. Who knows what they'll be this upcoming season. But if you win all 3 of those games, it feels like 8 wins is well within reach. You lose all 3 of those games, you're probably scratching to finish 500, if that. So to me, those games I think are really going to dictate one way or the other which way this season is going, but we shall see. Doesn't feel like the worst schedule CSU could have pulled out of all of this. There are a couple things I would change, but that's the case every single year. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit of hoops here. 40 minutes into the show. Let's talk about a massive opportunity for the women's team first, and then we'll move on to the men's team. The women 11-3 in the league. Those home losses against Air Force and New Mexico really sting. Like, the Rams have been awesome on the road in league play, losing in Vegas to this UNLV team who's 13-1. Their only league loss to San Diego State, who CSU swept actually. But the Air Force, especially losing that game at home at this point, is where you're really feeling it, because without that, you're 12-2 with an opportunity to beat them and tie UNLV. Now you're still going to need some help. Having said that, UNLV does still have to go to Laramie, so all the top 3 still play each other. You have an opportunity there. CSU hosts Wyoming still as well. UNLV, they've got like 6-7 scorers that average 9 points a game. Really deep roster. Not the same situation as it's been the last couple years, who's more like Wyoming. Desi Ray Young, I believe her name was. They had just a dominant post player who just, would basically single-handedly bully you. Fertig does a similar thing for Wyoming this year. It's more spread out, and what's interesting and what should be fun about this matchup is CSU very similar. Ronsick is certainly the best player, Emma Ronsick, that is. And she can cement herself, I feel like, as the conference player of the year. If CSU wins this game against UNLV and wins against Wyoming, she performs well right now. Her and Fertig kind of 1-2 in all the major stats. Ronsick about 19 points a game, Fertig about 20 points a game. Verdig also leads the league in rebounding and like blocks. She's been a beast. She feels like she's been there for like 20 years, but she is a beast for sure. That's going to be a tough matchup for the Rams. But it kind of feels like it sorts itself out kind of naturally here over the last couple of weeks in terms of the seeding and the conference, player of the year awards and all that. Like whoever wins the league probably going to have the conference player of the year. Although if UNLV wins, it will be interesting to see how they handle it because they don't really have that lead workhorse that's racking up the stats. It's more of a collective effort this season, but a really huge opportunity here. If you win this one and you win out, you give yourself a chance to win the league. You're going to need some help. You have to root for Wyoming to beat them, and then you need a little bit more help if you wanted anything other than a tie. But you've got an opportunity. We'll see how the Rams can show up in a big game. Moby, 1 p.m. on Saturday. I'm actually going to be out on the road. I wish I could be there for that one because it's a big, big game. At 8 p.m., obviously, we've got the men's matchup. CSU looking to go 4-0 against the state of Nevada so far. Already swept Nevada. 1-0 against UNLV this far. Won pretty convincingly in the game in Moby, 84-62. That was a game that that and Fresno, I believe, were the same week, and it was very similar. Like they had been very frisky against some of the top teams. Fully expected it to be a grind. UNLV got a ton of respect for Dean Thomas, and he was awesome in that game. He had 19 points. Henley had 19 as well. I think that's kind of the recipe for CSU, though, in this one is, that Dean Thomas is going to get his. He might score 25 in this game. But I think the assists are going to be the big factor with him. Make anybody other than him step up and consistently knock down shots. Like, if Thomas goes for 25, if he only has 2-3 assists, I still think CSU wins this game, should be in a really good spot. I think it's more scary if he's more in that like 20 and 10 range. If he gives you a neat Clifford game where not only is he getting his, he's making great passes and getting everybody else rolling. He's capable of that. But it's also dependent on, some of these other guys stepping up around him. Didn't really happen in that first game. I mean, Henley had 19, but it was just, usually they get more from Bedford. He didn't do much in that game. From CSU standpoint, if you do what you did in the first matchup, most certainly I think you're going to win. They went 12-24 from 3-point in that game. Kyan, Neek, and J Lake combined to hit 10. UNLV struggles to shoot the 3 ball. I think if you hit 10 plus threes against this team on the road, assuming you have any type of presence in the post whatsoever, you should win this game relatively comfortably. UNLV does defend the 3 pretty solidly. CSU in conference play the second best 3-point shooting team. UNLV, the second best 3-point defensive team in the league. So kind of interesting to see who wins there. I think, though, against a team like UNLV that does get a lot of blocks, they're good at shot contesting. You have to play with a little bit of physicality. Like, it can't just all be cute. Now, the offensive action that you were able to get in that game was great. The ball movement was tremendous. You had multiple guys, knock down shots. 4 different players finished with double-digit figures in that first matchup against UNLV. You had 24 assists on 30 made field goals. Very much in line with what we have seen from CSU the last couple of games at home. But that's at home. Now you're going out on the road. It's not going to be like going to the Pit. It's not like going to Utah State or Viejas. It's a big arena, but it feels empty because UNLV fans don't really fill it up consistently. It's the sight lines and stuff usually are pretty good for the guys. There's not a whole lot going on behind the hoops, which is encouraging. I think it's why, like Isaiah Stevens in particular, loved playing at the Thomas and Mack Center, would just ball out every single time. That the Rams and the Rebels faced off in Moby too, but especially in Vegas. Can Neek do that for you? Can your star shine brightest out on the road and give you an opportunity to keep pace with the top 3 teams in the league? If he does that and you get the type of production that you're getting from the rest of the rotation, which has now been pretty consistent, you should win this game. I mean, he had 22.7 assists, 4 steals in that first win. Standard Neek performance, 7 of 11 from the floor, 4 of 5 from deep. So he really shot the ball well. If if he has another 20, and 10 type game, they're going to be in a really good spot, especially if Cayenne and Jay Lake are stretching the floor like we saw in this most recent win over Nevada. Those guys are key. You know what Neek can get for you just about every night. Though, that because of the offense and the way it flows, you're going to get good looks from deep for Jalen Lake when they kick it back out to him. And Cayenne is able to create his own shot at any given point, and he's knocking those down with consistency. I just feel like if those three shoot the ball the way that they're capable of, I don't feel like UNLV, based on what we've seen for most of this year, is going to have the offensive firepower to match it. But the Rams did turn over the ball a little bit too much against UNLV last time. They certainly did against Nevada as well. UNLV had 16 points off of turnovers. So while the shot selection was great, the assist to turnover ratio, or the assist to field goal ratio was awesome. You would like to see them cut down the turnovers. They had 13. That's a way, particularly out on the road against an athletic UNLV team that's not tremendous in their half-court offense. Like, that's a way that you give them confidence, give them life, giving them those uncontested, rim runs after getting your pocket picked at midcourt, sloppy passes that lead to uncontested layups the other way. Like, that's a recipe for disaster out on the road. And I do feel like CSU, especially out of the gate, like, set the tone. They need to be a lot cleaner when it comes to the turnovers than they have been in some of these wins. That's really the only thing I can nitpick with the offense, like, post-Christmas. I feel like the shot selection is great. They're knocking down threes with much more consistency. They're getting more contribution across the board. They've established a presence in the post, which they had none of early on in the year. A lot of that had to do with injuries and the way that the roster was being impacted, not having Bemba out there, having to start Morton as a big. Like, there were just a lot of things that weren't working well early on with the rotation. They've solved all of that. And if you can just do what you're capable of against this team, I do feel like the Rams should relatively cruise. I mean, Bemba had 22 points, 8 of 9 from the floor in the first matchup against UNLV. If he can have that type of game, obviously they're going to be in a really good spot. But if he can give you 10 and 10 most nights, give me 10 points, and give me 10 boards, the Rams are going to win a lot of games with what they are getting from their outside shooters, with what they have from Neek and Cayenne, who can get their look anywhere on the floor. That physical presence has always been kind of like, if they have that, then the Rams are really firing. If it's all knocking down jump shots, that's a bit of a crapshoot. Like, can you hit 15 threes on the road? That's a way to win, but it's a tough way to sustainably win. And the three-point shooting has been really great of late. Really, the last 5 halves, it's been lights out. Going back to that second half against Utah State, but they just need to do their thing, man. They've got to do their thing if they're going to be able to pull this one out. And if they want to keep pace with the top 3 in the league, like, the 2 seed is well within reach for CSU. You still play Utah State later on in the year. And what's encouraging, from CSU standpoint, is when you look at our remaining schedule versus Utah State or Boise State or San Diego State, who are kind of the 3 teams you're right there in the mix against. We're assuming New Mexico is going to win the regular season. The next 4 games for Utah State, they host San Diego State, they go to Boise, then they come to CSU, and they host Air Force. So Air Force, you should count that as a win. Very easily could lose the next 3 if you're Utah State. Now, if they win all 3 of those, that'd be a hell of a statement. I think that would cement their at-large candidacy at that point. But CSU, I mean, if you win this game against UNLV, after that, like, you go to Air Force, another winnable road game, and you set yourself up pretty nicely. You still got San Jose State at home. Winning in Boise is going to be tough. Almost nobody's been able to do it this year other than San Diego State. So it's not one that you just write off. Like, if they win this game against UNLV, boom, they're going to win out. But San Jose State, Air Force, those are games you should expect to win. Utah State at home, as good as that team is, I still expect CSU to win their home games. And I said the same thing against San Diego State. They lost that game somewhat convincingly in Viejas. Didn't deter me in the slightest. I feel like the second half, really the second 30 minutes, are much more of an accurate representation of the the two teams, like I feel like they're pretty evenly matched. I mean, Utah State maybe a little bit more experienced, a little bit more versatility. They certainly swarm you defensively, but I like the position that the Rams are in going into these, final 5-6 games. Can they take care of business out on the road? They've been great in these spots early on in the year. They won in Reno. They won against San Jose State convincingly. They won in Laramie, which is a tough place for even great teams to win. Neither of these are going to be super hostile settings, so you're not going to have the energy created for you organically by the stands. It's going to be on you to lock in and just play quality basketball, but it's also not going to be intimidating like being in the pit or Viejas or something like that. So pretty good spot here going into these next couple of games. I am interested to see how CSU is able to finish this year, because I've argued this is the most impressive coaching job from Niko Medved to this point. I just think this is a team that has some nice pieces, but I mean, this isn't the 2022 team that won 25 games. This isn't even a team last year with, Joel Scott was underrated, but Neek and Isaiah on top of that. Like, the depth isn't quite there, but they're really gritty, and the things that they do are sustainable. And when you play defense and you knock down free throws and you get good looks that you largely are able to hit across the board, you've got multiple guys that are able to do it with consistency, you're going to be in a good spot. The big key for me with CSU and UNLV in this matchup, make anybody other than Dean Thomas beat you. Kind of how I felt about the Wyoming matchup in Agbim. Like, he's going to get his. Make anybody else step up and beat you. And if somebody else does, then you tip your cap to him. But based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks, I like the spot CSU's in. Ken Palm likes CSU to win a tight game. For a long time, it had the Rams projected to drop this one. The numbers probably juiced a little bit with the shooting performance that CSU had against Wyoming and Nevada, but they're in a good spot here. Taylor in the Toyota chat says Tom Mosser had a pod ranking coaches with their team next season, gave Nico a 7. Think that's fair. Also more or less than 50-50. CSU gets a top 3 seed. 7 feels low for me on Medved, but I'm also higher on him than I am on Leon, or I know it's hard to argue that he's a better coach than Pitino based on what we've seen this year. But I think Medved is able to do more with less than a lot of other teams are. Now, I do think if the roster construction is also being taken into account, you're assuming a lot with New Mexico. Like, is Pitino going to be back? Is Dent going to be back? Are any of those guys going to be back? There's a pretty good chance none of them are. Who knows with Utah State? Are they going to lose a 5th, coach in 5 years? Calhoun has been really impressive. If Medved is back and CSU retains its top talent, you keep Cayenne and Jalen Crocker-Johnson and Bemba, and then you build around, these other young guys, Jorgensen, and you're excited about Slater. You go out in the portal, you add a wing. I would put CSU top 3-4 going into next year personally. Maybe I'm biased in that instance, but I feel like that's not enough love for where Medved, in my opinion, ranks in the conversation for great Mountain West coaches. All right, let's do our Mountain West power ranking, and then let's call it a day and get on out of here. If you've got any more questions, comments, etc., throw them our way in the Toyota chat. I will answer as many questions as you guys throw my way. But let's do the Mountain West power ranking. Thought a couple of games to watch. Starting at the bottom, it's tough. Air Force lost like 16 or 17 in a row at this point. They're 11th, still looking for that first Mountain West win. I don't love that component of CSU going to the Springs on Tuesday. No team wants to finish over. In particular, they seem to punch up a little bit against CSU the last couple of years. I think they really embrace being spoilers, and naturally it makes sense. If you're Air Force basketball, you're getting less runway, you're getting less coverage than even like Greeley on the basketball side. So it's tough. They would love to play spoilers against CSU. CSU trying to maybe build a sneaky at-large candidacy. I'm not trying to get anybody's hopes up, because I think winning the tournament is really the only way you could expect to make it at this point. But I've said it a couple times now. If you beat Utah State and you win you win out, which would include, beating Boise on the road. Your metrics are going to be looking pretty good. Also, assuming that you got to the title game in Vegas, probably featuring another win over like a San Diego State level team. You still got an opportunity here to build the resume. It's not a done conversation, I guess, is all I'm trying to say. Are you on the outside looking in at this point with how the bubble is breaking? For sure. You never know, though. Just got to get through a couple of these frisky teams here at the end and then make a run at the right time. Fresno felt like they were turning a corner at one point. The wheels have fallen off. Neither of those teams have won a game in quite some time. San Jose State as well. They've had some bad injury luck. Felt like they had a nice 2-3 week stretch there where they were giving everybody a game. They've lost a few in a row now as well. Wyoming at 8. That bottom 4 tier, I think Wyoming and San Jose State, you can kind of coin flip depending on the day. Clearly, Fresno and Air Force are the bottom tier. And then same deal with UNLV and Nevada, like 7 and 6. It just kind of depends on the week. I like Nevada's roster slightly better than UNLV, but I think Deaton Thomas Jr. is the best player between those two teams. I like Alfred slightly better than I like Kevin Kruger. I got asked from my guy Taylor a couple seconds ago about ranking the Mountain West coaches. I think both those guys would be fairly low based on the last 2 years at least. But I've got UNLV 7, Nevada 6, but it kind of depends on the week. The top 5 is closer to being set at this point. But San Diego State, I need a little bit more consistency from them. Inherently, I'm always going to respect them. I still think they're dangerous in the Mountain West tournament because of what they do defensively, and a lot like New Mexico, not to the same extent because they're much more inconsistent offensively. They do have these stretches where they just swarm you, though, and like it's a 15-0 run in 3 minutes or something like that. Bird is capable of going off for like 9-10 by himself in 2 minutes. I do have them at 5, though. I got Boise State at 4. They jumped San Diego State after a big home win over New Mexico. Really kicked their ass in the second half. I was highly impressed with what we saw from Boise State. That was what we had expected from Boise State this season. They put the freshman in the lineup. He had a great game. Stanley even, that was more of what we had expected to see from him this year. There's a reason that everybody was so high on Boise with Degenhart and Cardenas and Stanley. Like the expectation was this team was going to be pretty good. I think Meadow and a couple of other guys haven't quite lived up to the bill, but they're a dangerous team here down the stretch, especially with Degenhart, who is basically good for a walking 20 points any given night. I have CSU at 3, Utah State at 2, and then New Mexico at 1. New Mexico, it's going to take a lot for them to fall off that top spot anytime soon. Utah State, they're taking care of business, but you still have a chance to earn that 2 seed if you are CSU. We're going to find a lot out about this Aggies team over the next 2-3 games. Like if they even go in 2-1 over the next 3 would be highly impressive. 1-2 feels the most realistic, which, if you can have one of those 2 losses be CSU and you can also take care of business on the Rams side, 2 seed is well within reach. If they go 0-3, then all of a sudden your chances of winning the 2 seed go through the roof so long as you take care of business against UNLV and Air Force. Taylor in the Toyota chat says, San Diego State, Utah State tomorrow. Who are we rooting for to help us out? Wish they could both lose, LOL. This is kind of one of those classic instances where each team winning and losing both helps and hurts you. To me, I think rooting for San Diego State makes more sense. You hoping for the Utah State backslide and trying to be able to steal that 2 seed is encouraging, but I'd have to verify and go through San Diego State's last couple of games again here. Let me pull it up real quick before we get out of here. See who San Diego State's remaining games are. Because, like I said, I feel like that 2 seed is pretty within reach. I pulled up the wrong schedule. Of course, Google gave me the women's schedule instead of the men. Could have been helpful. Not in this particular case, though. I think they still have to play New Mexico. Yeah, they've still got at Utah State, then against New Mexico. So for me, I feel like it makes sense to root for San Diego State to beat Utah State and then lose at home to New Mexico, which, makes sure that San Diego State isn't going to leap you. They probably win against Wyoming, UNLV, and Nevada. But that's how I would look at it. I think you root for SDSU against Utah State, and then you root for SDSU to then fall in their game against New Mexico. And I think that's a pretty realistic outcome. Games to watch, Boise at Nevada, San Diego State at Utah State, obviously CSU, UNLV. That's all I've got for you guys this morning. Hope everybody enjoyed the show. Be back with more content throughout the week. Keep your eyes on the site for more written content. Had a piece on Kyan Evans that came out this week. Had 10 takeaways from the football schedule. Go check that out as well. Much love to everybody in Ram Nation. I really appreciate everybody that's rocking with us. Stay safe out there. Stay warm. Always proud to be y'all. Peace.
We all city like the mayor.